Today I'd like to do a quick video of a smaller Acadian area of Nova Scotia in Guysborough County, often known as Torbay or Larry's River, Charles Cove, Port Felix in that area. I'll show you on the map in a minute. This is an older photograph, 100-year-old more or less photograph of the area. Then we have another here. Gives you an idea of the history in that area and a more recent image of that area of the country. In this video, like my others, I'd just like to go over where this area is that we're going to be talking about today, which is Torbay, Larry's River. So again, here is Nova Scotia, and the area we're looking at today is right up in this area right here. My last video I did was over here, and that was the Arichat, Richmond County. This area is, this part of the province of Nova Scotia is Guysborough County, and this coastal area right in this little bay area here is what we're going to be looking at here now. And so we'll focus in here. All right, so you can see some of the main areas here. This is a French Canadian, another Acadian, a very remote Canadian, French Canadian or Acadian area of Nova Scotia. And you won't find a lot of French-speaking people here anymore, even though the names are there. A lot of they've moved to speaking English, and that's a shame, but that is what happens, I guess. So right over here from Whitehead through Port Felix, Cole Harbour, Charles Cove, Larry's River, and Torbay. This kind of area is where we're looking at right here. And there's other few little, they don't show up here, like Lundy, and there's a few other little areas where but this is the focus of this. After I show you this on the map, I'm going to go over some websites that that have the some historical information about this area, as well as the names, some of the family names that you find if you're doing family history research in this area. Again, quickly, these people came from, most of them, almost all, they came from two places. Most of them, probably 70% of them, families arrived from further south in Nova Scotia near Halifax in Chesapeake. So they came up. They came from they came from the valley. They were kicked off their land. They ended up in Halifax as prisoners. They ended up settling in Chesapeake. Then they felt uncomfortable with the influx of the more and more English people, and they couldn't get land. They weren't treated very well, to be honest, and they asked to petition to have land up here, and they came and settled this part of Guysborough County. And so here we're looking at wonderful people again, salt of the earth. They were it was of course fishing and a little bit of farming for just subsistence, but really, and the other area that people came in from was, I'm going to just change this map view here a little bit. They came in from over here, this area here. You'll find families from Harvey-Boucher, Tracadie, and Pomquet. Some of them moved over here into this area later on. And so some of these family names from over here you'll find over here as well. So there was some intermarrying there. This is one of three pretty reasonable websites that are done for this very small area in Guysborough County that we're going over right now. And I wanted to just quickly, with this one, I wanted to go to the history here and Charles Cove. So I'll just quickly go back. I know I've gone over this already, but here they have the main areas, the French Canadian areas especially, that are in Torbay is called the area. I mean, there is Torbay, but you'll find in a lot of records Torbay. Someone could be living in Charles Cove or Larry's River or whatever. So Port Felix, Larry's River, Charles Cove, and Whitehead are the bigger areas that are you'll find in the records. Torbay will also be, like I said, in the records, and Lundy is a smaller place. And Yankee Harbor that they have here in Cole Harbour they have more English or other immigrants. But to look at the history of Charles Cove, there's a nice little write-up here. It was done by one of the people here. It's very good. I'm just going to read a little bit of this. It says, Charles Richard was a descendant of Michael Richard, who came to Acadian in 1652 from, I'm going to read this, Saint-Ange, France, and settled in Belle Isle along the Annapolis River. And I mentioned that in some of my other videos, that Annapolis River is part down near Port Royal, the first place where the Acadians settled, all through the Annapolis Valley, which is in the southern part of Nova Scotia. 100 years later, as war between France and England neared, the British authorities demanded the Acadians renounce their faith and swear allegiance to the crown. The Acadians, holding steadfastly true to their faith and to their heritage, refused, thus resulting in their mass exile from Nova Scotia, their first home in the New World. The migration of the French Canadians was miserable. It was through their inner strength and determination that many families survived the journey and resettled their families. During the expulsion of the Acadians, the inhabitants of various settlements were rounded up and loaded onto boats and shipped through to the end of December 1755. A number of Acadians, in trying to avoid deportation, ran into the woods seeking refuge throughout Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. For many Acadians, this was a waste of time and effort, since Acadian settlers continued to be deported until 1763, when they were discovered along the coast or apprehended by English troops. They were either loaded onto boats leaving the American colonies, England, or France. Some did not leave Nova Scotia, but were kept prisoner in Halifax and forced to work on the fortifications. Charles Richard was a prisoner of the British, having had discovered that their land was now occupied by the English. This is after after they were released from prison, forced them to settle elsewhere. The Acadians were denied the right to settle on their former lands, and faced with this situation and acting on their desire to get as far away from their enemies as possible, the Acadians chose to settle in remote areas such as Charles Cove. And I'll just leave it for there. But the reason I read that is it's very fascinating that these people that started out in the Annapolis Valley, a lot of them started out there in the Annapolis Valley, through Grand Pré and through those areas. They ended up some of them were, of course, sent back to France, but some were held as captives in Windsor area or in Halifax, and weren't in the end deported, but were kept as prisoners. And they went and settled in Chesapeake, which is just north of Halifax, very close to Halifax, Dartmouth. But when when the Loyalists came in about in the 1780s, then there was this great inflow of more people into Nova Scotia, and these people who had already had years of difficulties with the English felt they couldn't continue to live in Chesapeake, which was too close to Halifax, and their lands were it was hard, they couldn't get land grants anymore, so they asked for land grants up in this area, which is a very remote area of Nova Scotia. Very few people live there in this part of Guysborough County. But they felt that they could be safe there and have their religion and their faith and their way of life and be away from their, I guess as they said here, their enemies. Another good website is an Acadian website called Canadian, Acadian.org. And again here they say the same kind of thing, lived in obscurity. So from the time of their settlement in the late 1700s through the early 1800s to the Torbay, Acadians were mostly a forgotten group, and I think that is pretty much safe to say even till today. And here they give a list of some of the names. We'll go over those at the end of here, but you'll see Bellefontaine, Richard, Pellerin, Manette, Lavandier, Petipa, Boudreau, David, Roy, and Bonvie were some of the earliest groups, and then they're also joined by Delorier, Fougère, Cassé, or Gelot, Avery, Dorian, Cashin, and Giroir, Thibault, and Bond. So these are some of the family names from this area. One other website that is for Port Felix. There's a Guysborough County genealogy site for the village, and that again has more information about how the people came. As it says here, the early Acadian settlers arrived from 1797 from Chesapeake, where they've been living since 1758 after the fall of Louisbourg, and following the American Revolution. Many Loyalists flocked to Nova Scotia, and the Acadian settlers were refused land grants in the Chesapeake area. So many left that area and traveled down the eastern shore, settling in Molasses Harbor, which is now Port Felix, Charles Cove, and Larry's River. And as it says here, life was difficult when the settlers first arrived, as they were isolated from the rest of their Acadian friends. And so these people lived in a very, even though that, you know, I've done a video on Arashat in that area, and we'll do a few other Acadian areas shortly. But this area, they were very cut off from the rest of they basically could only get in by ocean, and they lived very, very poor lives, but wonderful people, and it's just interesting when you're doing the family history work, and I've done quite a bit in this area. You'll see these people coming up from the records from Chesapeake, and that's where they came from, and then you also see that those people from Chesapeake came from Grand Pré and from the other parts of the Annapolis Valley. So it's fascinating to follow, not fascinating, it's sad, but fascinating to follow the travels of these families as they tried to just live their lives. Again, I've made a listing of some of the French, Canadian, Acadian names. Found, now this one, of course, group is for Guysborough, eastern Guysborough County, right on the coast in the Torbay area. Port Felix, Charles Cove, Torbay, and Larry's River, and those communities, those small communities there. So this is not all the names, of course, and some of these are very not, you won't find that many of them, but others like the Avery and the what are their names? Bellefontaine, the Pellerin. I'm just going to pull this down here. The Pellerin, Manette, Petitpas. Some of these names are more common than some of the others, but again, we have the French family name, some alternate spellings, and I may have these backwards. Could be that the French was for Every was but that's how I have them there. So and again, there's some of the odd ones like O'Coin. You'll see if you were in the U.S. and that someone had moved to the U.S., they may have their name as Wedge, right? So you may not find that person, and again, I've mentioned that in my other videos. Or the name Fougere, if that family, my member of their family moved to the U.S., or maybe other parts of Canada, but especially to the U.S., you'll find the record often is Fraser, even though they are a Fougere. This interesting name of Gelot, you see spelled in very many different ways. So if you're doing family research and searching the records on Family Search or Ancestry, you need to look at trying with different spellings if you're trying to find your family name. And because some is anglicized, some is just different ways of spelling the French, same as Landry and Landry, you know. LeBlanc is another one that you'll find if they're moved to the States, a lot of them go by White. And so if you were in the U.S. and you were looking at records, a census record in the U.S. or your family records, and you see White, you go, oh, and it says they're from Canada or from Nova Scotia, you really should look at, they might be Whites, maybe maybe they're an English family, but they could often be a French family, and the name LeBlanc is what you'd be researching for once you're looking in Nova Scotia records. So this is just a quick name. I'm going to go up to the top and just slowly down here through some of these names, so you can, if you want to take a look at them, very common names for this area of Nova Scotia. And there you go.